Hey everyone, and welcome to Behind the Mask. I'm one of your co-hosts, EJ, and joining me today are my friends Lori.
Hey.
And T.
Hello.
This is episode 2. We're calling it No More Masks. As we teased in our last episode, we'll be discussing the poem by Charles C. Finn called Please Hear What I'm Not Saying. If you've never read it before, we encourage you to. We shared the link to the poet's website on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at BehindTheMaskPC. Today we won't be reading the entire poem. However, we'll be breaking it down, discussing our initial reactions, what stood out to us, and how we can or have applied it within our lives, and also how it's inspired the podcast moving forward. At first, we want to talk about a little bit about our initial reactions, and I think Lori's going to share a little bit about it first because I know she's the one that brought it to us. So take it away, Lori.
All right. So I actually read this poem. I was 9 or 10, pretty young, and it really impacted me hugely. But I didn't know at that time a lot about the author. I believe when I first read it, it was still considered or had just recently been claimed by the author. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. So this poem was written with no name in 1966 by a young Jesuit in seminary at St. Ignatius Prep in Chicago. He shared it with some of his friends and colleagues and basically forgot about it. A few years later, he went to this conference for humanistic psychology, and there was a class entitled, Please Hear What I'm Not Saying. So he's like, I think I'm going to go check that out. And to his surprise, he goes to the class and he hears his poem read aloud and then discussed by this entire group of psychologists. And it was really interesting to him. He just was so shocked and he had no idea. And then a couple of years later, he's working, I think it said out of Loyola and Marymount. And a woman that was in a care group of his pulls his poem out of her pocket and starts reading it. And he's really beginning to see that this thing that he wrote in response to another theologian's prompting and some research that he'd been doing on poetry. He'd never tried his hand at poetry before. And he was amazed that there seemed to be this worldwide response. He got on the internet and there were all these different links and people, and it was written as anonymous or author unknown, because he hadn't put his name to it. And so then in 1969, as happens, someone else tried to claim it. And so he decided that he should set the record straight. And the rest is, as we say, history.
Wait, so this was in the 60s?
Yes.
So he writes something in response to something, and then he
shared
doesn't claim it.
No, because he didn't. He
didn't think it was worth anything, or
well, he really did. It was just something he wrote off the cuff. He said it actually came really quickly and smoothly, and he shared it with his wife, and then he shared it with some of his colleagues at work, and gave them a copy and said, what do you think? And everybody liked it, but he wasn't doing it as, I'm going to go publish this in a book, or this is
well, and, I guess what makes me I'm like, how does that even possible? Because I write, I've responded to things, and I would never not put my name on something that I've written if it's going to be in any way, shape, or form published, put out there, responded to.
Right, so but I don't think he thought it was going to be published. He literally gave it to his friends and colleagues, and the friends and colleagues were impacted by it, ended up sharing it with other people in their lives, and it kind of just got passed around until all of a sudden everybody's like, now wait a minute, who wrote this? Where did this come from?
So the telephone game.
Yeah, and people didn't know. So, 3 years later,
So 3 years later, how long did it take him until he could prove that it was his poem?
It actually didn't take very long because he had plenty of proof. and he had his colleagues that he had worked with. They all had their original copies.
Oh,
And
okay.
so it was actually pretty easy for him. And so the other person, they don't even mention it on the website, like who it was, but somebody was trying to claim it as their own. And
Right.
yeah.
And for listeners who are asking why I'm asking so much, I'm just surprised because nowadays there's so many intellectual property laws and copyright
Yes.
laws. And honestly, like if an author wants to copyright their novel, they like have to have it like sealed and like a copyright stamp basically put on it, and like to prove that it's theirs. It's just, there's a lot of hoops that has to be jumped through. And if they don't have that copyright, it's like a fight, and it can be years of fighting to
Yes.
like prove that it's yours. So I'm like, wow, this is the 60s. Okay. So
Right.
granted, there wasn't the internet like we have it
Context.
So I'm like, okay, I get it now. All right. So now that we know a little history about it, what did you think about it? Because it impacted you pretty, like, because you were what, a teen when you read this?
I was a preteen.
Okay.
But for many years, I mean, we talked in that first episode, I love reading, and I was constantly grounded when I was younger. I just, when I got grounded, I would of course be sent to my room, and I was told that I couldn't play with my toys. So I all of a sudden looked around my room and I'm like, well, there's a bookshelf over there. And so I just started pulling the books off the shelf and reading. I read the dictionary. I started reading history books. I read everything I could get my hands on. Yeah. And somehow this has been placed in a book of poetry as an unknown author. And I read it, and it really hit me at my core because he was talking about masks and fear and all of these quintessential things as humans, in my mind, that we struggle with. And I had a lot of fears. I definitely didn't feel like anybody was hearing me at the time. I grew up in a household where children were to be seen and not heard. I kind of felt like I was more like a doll that got dressed up and placed in front of people and told to act perfectly. And if we didn't act perfectly, then there were consequences for that. And the poem, Please Hear What I'm Not Saying, just the title screamed out in my mind like, this guy gets me. And I was reading another response, and there was a young girl, and she was 13 when she read it. And she took the poem to her mother, who she was fighting with, and she said, here, read this and you'll get me. You know what I mean? And and the mother and her actually ended up bonding together over the poem. My mom and I did not have that scenario. My mom wouldn't have cared. She'd have been like, yeah, whatever, Lori. Go back to your room. You're grounded. So that was not going to happen for me. But I was excited to hear that it worked for somebody. But I felt that this author, this Charles C. Finn, but I didn't know who it was at the time. I felt like he got inside my head and he was sharing my innermost thoughts in a poem. So that's how it affected me.
Wow. How about you, Tina?
This poem, I see my own battle with social anxiety. Most who meet me would never guess that this has been a pretty serious thing for me, pretty much almost my whole life. So that's what stood out to me most about this poem. I also noticed in this poem that it contrasts the inner or real self versus the outer self. So the one we show others.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's this desperate longing for a real connection without fear of being rejected, but to be accepted as we are. And so that really, like I said, that to me, the poem as a whole really represented that struggle with social anxiety.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I think for me it was tough because, I think I had said before, I'm not much into poetry.
Me too.
Thanks, ladies, for humoring me.
Yeah. No, it's fine. It has a good message, and it does have a point. It's just, I don't know, for me I struggled reading it just because I'm like, first off, we don't hear the subject, we just keep hearing I throughout the I am, I was. So I was like, like, what's the subject of this poem? I'm like, are we talking about a physical mask? Are we talking about a person? And then we get the last lines, we find out what the subject is. I'm like, okay, and for me, like, especially more in the last few recent years, I am is referenced in the Bible as God. So I'm like, yeah, that's what I know I am as, So to have it be, in the end, end of the poem, we find out that it's a man and a woman, those are the people wearing the masks, and that's who's talking.
Yes.
And I don't know, it had a good point. I felt like there was a lot of repetition that I'm like, I guess that's a thing in poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I don't know much about poetry. I don't study it. I don't often read it, so I don't know. But yeah, so I mean, it was good. It does have a point, and now knowing a little bit more about the author and like how it came about, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it didn't seem like it was completely structured like the traditional poems, like a haiku or the ones that I'm not even going to try and name the names because I don't know. But it's so, I don't know. I had a friend, like, I was talking to her the other day about it, and she's like, well, what poem are you going to read? And I told her the name. She's like, oh, well, just read it like it's a story. And I'm like, well, I can do that. And I, so I did. I read it again, and I was like, okay, I get, so I see the point. You get the, you get the compare and contrast between, the physical, what everybody sees, and then what's really going on inside. And we can all relate to that.
So I went back to his website thing. His claim is that he had tried several years earlier. He had started trying to give poetry a try. And there's a French writer named Charles Peguy, Peguy, who has a very fluid type of free verse. And he felt like, if I were going to write poetry, if I were going to do this, then I think this is the person who's going to have an influence over the style that I do. And there's all the, it was so great. I got to do a whole section of poetry with my little 8-year-old grandson this last year due to the pandemic stuff. My son calls me up and says, Mom, David's supposed to do poetry. Could you teach that? Because I don't want to. And I was like, I would
that
love
would be me.
to.
I don't want to.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want to do that. He goes, Mom, you'll be so much better than I will. And so I got to talk about Shakespeare and Thoreau and all of these big authors, and
who?
Yeah, you I love you. Whitman and all of my favorite authors.
I haven't read them either.
Yeah, I know, but I have, and I love them. So it was so great to share that passion with my grandson. And then we wrote some poetry together. And so you can write it in the rhyming, you can write a haiku, or there's this free, fluid type, which is kind of like, Erin, you know how I do vernacular poetry, what I call vernacular poetry. I really write a story based upon vernacular of something that someone likes, but mine's more of a fluid story type, but it's still considered poetry.
Yeah,
because it's not a story, like a short story. It's a one-page, thing that is directly written for a particular person, and they're something that they can connect to. So that would be more of this fluid type of Charles Peguy. So, yeah.
Cool.
You remember how you shared with me a whole vernacular last week of things I didn't know about fan fiction and shows and things? Well, I can share with you a whole vernacular about poetry.
There you go. Yeah.
And thankfully on podcast, you cannot see my eyes glaze over.
Oh my gosh. I get so excited about this stuff.
I know. I was going to say, well, when I was in 4th grade, I wrote a poem about the Sequest. Does that count for something?
Oh my gosh. I wished I were a dolphin.
No, but Darwin was the coolest character.
He was. He
Anyways.
was pretty cool.
Yeah, so I kind of talked about our initial reactions. What about favorite part specifically, or what stood out? Is there a specific stanza or line that like really grabbed you?
So, if it's okay with you ladies, I really wanted to share the opening 2 stanzas of the poem, just so people can get a feel for what we're talking about if they haven't read it. And then I'll share probably the part that I connected with the most. So, the poem starts off with, "Don't be fooled by me. Don't be fooled by the face that I wear. For I wear a mask, 1,000 masks that I'm afraid to take off. And none of them is me. Pretending is an art that's second nature with me. But don't be fooled. For God's sake, don't be fooled. I give you the impression that I'm secure, that all is sunny and unruffled with me." And so he's just really trying to reveal what's underneath the mask, who the world sees him as, who he presents to the world, as T said earlier. But for me, one of the parts I really connected with the most, it's down towards the bottom. And I said that I would share, some more about my past and so forth, but I am a person who has suffered abuse from a very young age up into my adult life. So the part that I connected with says, "The nearer you approach to me, the blinder I may strike back. It's irrational, but despite what the books about man often say, I'm irrational. I fight against the very thing that I cry out for. But I'm told that love is stronger than the strong walls, and in this lies my hope." And you, T, and you, EJ, you guys know hope is like my anchor, and it is my foundation, and it is what I feel like has gotten me through all of the storms and the rough seas and the hills and the valleys and everything else. If I did not have hope, I would not be standing here. And so you can imagine, even at 9-10 years old, when I'm reading this, I just clung to that, because I do tend to push away that which I want most because I'm so afraid. So that's where I connected with it.
Amen. Alrighty. So Tina, what do you think about the poem? Or what were your reactions?
So, my favorite line is right there toward the beginning. I mean, there's some really good stuff through there, but I think it's, "For I wear a mask, 1,000 masks, masks that I'm afraid to take off, and none of them is me." That really jumped out at me, because I've always sort of felt like I was a chameleon. Like, whatever situation I was in, I was going to figure out the best way to stay safe because of that social anxiety. I would figure out what people wanted from me very quickly, and then do that. I was going to do that. And oftentimes, you just end up feeling hollow, like that really wasn't me. And then when you get credit for whatever it is that you did right, it didn't feel right because it didn't feel like me. It didn't feel authentic. And so that just kind of stood out to me. Gotten older, I am more in line with that. Like, I understand the purpose of the masks, so to speak, the purpose of being a chameleon, and realize it really wasn't that much different than other people in doing that. And I'll talk about that more later. But, and that really, I want to challenge that stanza because, in my opinion, they are all part of me.
Amen.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, that all makes up us, like, who we are.
Absolutely.
So that inner rebel in me is coming out. So my response to that is, yeah, no, not for me. Because for me, most of the masks I wore were not masks I wanted to wear. Or I felt that I wore them only in response to a particular person or situation out of fear or need, and so in my mind, to say that they're me, I don't know, means to say that I'm this scared little rabbit, little child, little whatever,
So
and that and and I and it's not that I'm not afraid, but if I wear something in my mind, if I wear something that I don't want to wear, or especially the ones that I was required to wear, societally with my family, I don't want to own that. I don't want to say that's me, because I don't feel like I had a choice in wearing some of those masks.
right.
So then I don't think that that's me.
Right. So here's the difference between your masks and my masks, is
Right.
that it's sort of like what I explain to clients. When we go through something, we develop tools to deal with that something. But
Yes, we do.
we outgrow those tools. So I would propose that we can outgrow our masks. So the mask that you
Yes.
needed to survive the things that you went through, you don't need anymore. So you can
Amen.
reject them. You can put them away. But I would say that you likely still have masks that you still use today.
Oh,
And
yeah, definitely.
that's a little bit of what I'll talk about in a bit too, is sort of that
Okay.
there's different kinds of masks for
Okay,
different.
yeah, it's good. I'm liking this dialogue. It's good to, because I'm like, wait. No, I don't want to own those, because I don't feel like they were definitely not me. And yes, you and I have talked long hours about, some of the masks I feel like I've had to wear. So yeah. All right. How about you, EJ?
You say it, so like slide it in there.
I'm trying to remember these things that I'm supposed to say.
Yeah. There are a couple that stood out to me. Some more shorter ones. One of them, you started actually saying it earlier. One of them that stood out to me is him saying, like, I give you the impression that I'm secure, that all is sunny and unruffled in me, within as well as without. That confidence is my name and coolness my game. That's the waters calm and I'm in command. And then I need no one, but don't believe me. My surface may seem smooth, but my surface is my mask. And I think about like the water and how like there's days where like the surface may be calm, but underneath the water stirring. And then I think of like the days where they're not calm and you can physically see how choppy the waves are, but then underneath you may not even notice it. So that kind of view comes into mind, for at least for me. But also just thinking like many a times, like I've had a rough day at work, but then I show up to a Zoom meeting or I show up to a church function and I'm like, how you doing? Oh, I'm great. Just honestly, it's more, I think a lot of times I just don't want to talk about work, or I don't like, sometimes I just don't want to talk about, like I have my handful of people that I do talk to about things and I can call and vent to, but I don't need everybody to know, not so much my business, but I just I don't want to stress everybody else out with all my frustrations, because not everybody can take my allow me to vent to them and not take it in and then them become frustrated. And I don't want them to become frustrated because of me just venting to them. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense. I'm thinking about a counselor response, and I'm not a counselor, by the way, but it's like, that's their ownership, not yours. But
right.
Anyway.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And it's like, yeah, they have to take ownership of that too. And, but on the other hand, I don't want to be the cause of them having to do that, And so then that's like all the guilt of, I feel bad. So, but then.
It sort of reminds me of when I go to the grocery store and the checkout cashier goes, how's your day going? And there's this pause and I look at her and I'm like, I don't think you really you're not really asked. That's the question you're not really wanting an answer to.
Yes.
Assuming you'd like me to get out of your line right now, you know. So, you know, and so it's like that moment of just reflexively going, oh, someone asked me a question, I'm going to answer it, and then realizing that's not really what they wanted to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of being aware that this may not be the time or place to let that all out.
Right.
Yes.
And I've observed people all the time, you know, like, you know, when you're in a group of friends, you know, one person maybe is having a rough day, and so then they sit down and talk with maybe somebody else in the group, and then the next thing you know, it's an hour go by and they're still sitting there. And it's like, oh, okay, you know, but that's how they need to process. And that's awesome. You know, that's how, you know, we all are different and we're not all expected to follow the same path. I don't know, for me, like, sometimes I do feel that I give off the calm, cool, collected. And I think for me, part of it is, you know, I have gone through taking care of my parents and struggling with all their, you know, health challenges. So now, like, when health challenges come up, I'm kind of numb to them. So, like, when people come at me with, like, health stuff, I'm like, okay. And I'm like, moving on. Not because I want to move on, but because I'm numb to, like, the effect of changing health drama.
Right.
But then in the core, I actually am scared. For example, my doctor ordered a routine CT scan just to rule a few things out, and one of them she wants to rule out is any kind of cancer that might be popping up that she doesn't know about. Not because we think I have it, but just because that's one of the things that something I do have wrong with me can cause in the future, and she just wants to make sure it's not sneaking up on us. So the last time anyone in my immediate family of my parents had a routine CT scan, my mom's cancer had come back. So that was in my mind. So needless to say, I was on the phone with Lori or talking to her about it.
Yes.
And I was like, so I was freaking out, but I was trying to stay cool because I was like, I don't want to break down in front of these strangers at the clinic, you know, while I'm getting this done, or, you know.
Yes, definitely.
Which kind of moves into, like, one of the other things that stood out to me was that I panic at my weakness exposed. And I can't tell you how many times I freak out or I panic at the idea of somebody finding out I have anxiety.
Oh, wow.
When I'm not ready for them to know. Not because I don't want them to know, but because I'm afraid of what they'll think of me because I have it.
Right.
Interesting.
So you panic at the idea of someone seeing you panic. So if you're already panicked, you're going to be that much more panicked. So it's like, just going to feed it like that snake.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, yes, that's a good description.
There's been times where, like, you know, like, I worry of, like, well, if I say that, are they going to think I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z?
Right.
So I can't say that because I don't want them to know. I just want to do the X, Y, and Z.
Right. Because you know that's the
Even
best
though
way to feel better. It's just to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can do X, Y, and Z that they need to be, you know, done. And I'm the one to do it, the right person to do it because I know what I'm doing. You know, I'm confident in that. But I'm afraid if they find out, I might you know, it's a vicious circle.
Mm-hmm. It is.
But I love following through with that. I didn't write down the whole line, but he was basically saying that acceptance and love can make us take off our masks, and it's the only way for us to be assured we're worth something. And I'm like, wow. Because if I'm willing to show myself and to be panicked in front of somebody and vent to somebody and not be afraid to share the deepest parts of me, if they accept that, that makes me feel better, because then I'm like, not so much validating my mask, but validating the fact that I'm worth something.
My social anxiety says they will not accept that.
So that's interesting, Tina, because I was going to ask. So it's interesting, EJ, that you chose this little passage here, because this is probably the one part of the poem I struggle with the most.
Really?
I don't like it. I don't. I want you to know how important you are to me. How you can be a creator, an honest to God creator of the person that is me. if you choose to. I struggle with that. You alone can break down the wall behind which I tremble. And I'm thinking, no, I alone can be the person that, like, I don't need somebody else to do that for me. I got
Right.
it. Now back away from my space, okay?
I remember being there, and then I had a nervous, emotional breakdown, and I hit the bottom of my valley and ended up having to see a psychologist for 3 years.
Right.
And go on super strong antidepressants because of it. So I learned that the hard way, that I can't always take care of it myself.
Right. And I think I'm
Right.
still in that process.
And that's certainly been my experience too. So yes, for the most part, currently, my social anxiety sits at a low thrum. It doesn't rear its head very often. It just sits in the background. Every once in a while, it kind of creeps up, and I'm like, whoa, what's that? Mostly because I have had experiences that have challenged those inner thoughts that I have that drive that social anxiety. And for me, it was starting college. It was going to college, getting in drama group, joining the newspaper club, and just doing those things and getting the feedback and realizing that I wasn't being taken out and stoned for having stupid
Right.
thoughts. So having those experiences and positive feedback is what has helped me to put that in its place. And then also my education and understanding what anxiety is, specifically social anxiety. And I have the advantage of knowing how mine started. So it gives me something like concrete to identify, to say I know how it started. I know that I can combat that, but it still sits there. And I think it's funny because most people are very, very surprised, because my other side of my personality is I'm very gregarious and outgoing and can be totally, weird, but yeah. So, and
I get you.
I love getting up in front of people. Like, I love teaching. I love doing presentations and different stuff like that. I loved being in drama club. When I called my mom and told her that I was in the drama club, she's like, "Yeah, surprise, duh," because that is in my opinion was my natural nature before the social anxiety. So,
Right.
So that's just some insight there that I was thinking of.
Yeah, I think something that, so I did a little journaling this week, kind of in response to some of this, rereading it, and where kind of trying to identify. So as a child who's been hurt and abused by those who should have loved and protected me and did not, you can imagine I have trust issues. And so as an adult, I came into this, so here I'm trying to develop this relationship with my Heavenly Father. And my relationship with my earthly father isn't great. And my relationship with my earthly family hasn't been great or healthy, or, and so I was like, wait a minute, you want me to what? You want me to trust you? Like, I'm like, okay, well, and I think, T, you and I talked at one point about, I struggle. Like, I definitely think that God has my best interests at heart. Like I quoted in Jeremiah 29:11, I rationally can say, yes, I believe that my God has plans for me, and they're plans not to harm me, but emotionally, I don't feel, I guess I'm afraid, because of all the things that have happened, that he isn't there to protect me. And there's this deep desire within me to be protected. So that's why I connected with that line. Like, I want to be in this relationship, if you will, with my God, with my friends, other people. But I'm going to push you away because there's something in me that says, but you're not really going to do it. You're not really going to protect me. You'll be there with me and you'll pick me up when it's done and walk by my side. And I just want to cry out to the world, but I need somebody to protect me because I don't want to keep going through all these things.
So if you would like make a fist, but with your thumb inside your fist.
Okay, I got it. Made a
Now
fist, thumbs inside.
the knuckles facing outward, that's the front part of your brain. That's called the prefrontal cortex. That part of your brain is rational. It's logical. It makes decisions. It can plan for the future. It makes sense of the things that you see around you and the things that you're experiencing. It helps control your behaviors and keep your emotions from ruling the world.
Okay, right.
Now flip that up. And now your fingers are pointing straight up to the ceiling.
Okay.
And in the center where your thumb is what we call our amygdala. Our amygdala is near our hypothalamus and our hippocampus. Almost said hippopotamus, and that would have been funny. But anyway, that's our emotional center. Okay? It's not rational.
Yeah, it's not.
And that's our emotional memories are stored there in that area. And there's no rationality about it. It's abstract. It's just all reaction. Okay?
Yes.
Now, the amygdala's job is to tell us that there is danger. So it's right there with all that emotional crap.
Right.
And it gets information first. So it gets everything you see, hear, taste, smell, touch, all of that first. Its job is to say danger or not danger. Now, it doesn't have access to what the front part of the brain knows. So it just reacts. And when it reacts, it sets off a range of things throughout your body, including hormones and chemicals, and gets it ready to fight or flight, freeze, submit. That's what it does.
That's what I'm seeing, danger even when it doesn't exist.
Right. Exactly. It's drawing on those emotional memories that have no context because your lid is flipped. Your front of your part of your brain is offline because as soon as that amygdala starts, that it doesn't allow the front of the brain to come online because you need to run or fight or submit or freeze to stay alive.
Yes.
And it's not an actual, like, it doesn't always have to be like a direct threat, like, oh my gosh, there's a lion, right?
Right.
It just
I think I could almost get that. Like, there's a lion.
Right.
That would be something I would not want to be near.
Exactly. So what you were describing is your rational brain understand and can grasp a bigger picture. But your emotional brain is irrational and cannot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think for the longest time, mine's kind of tended to run my life. So, yeah. So I do a lot of running.
A lot of reacting.
Yep.
So, and trust me, I'll go into all this again. But with my clients, especially my younger clients, we call that flipping your lid. So when your emotional brain's in charge, you've flipped your lid. You need to put the lid back down.
I love it. I love it. Writing that down.
Well, and I think in all of this too, like, I know for me, like, I hate hiding. Like, I want to be an open book.
Right.
And I think, like, and I know you guys do too. Especially because I know we hear the phrase a lot in like our ministries and stuff. Our test can be our testimony. And, you know, the stuff we've gone through, the things we've done, the masks we've had to wear is our testimony. And that could help somebody. But also, you know, again, I think, you know, there's the anxiety and the fear of like, oh, how's somebody going to react when they find out? So we go through all these like emotional things. And like, Lori, you're right. And even, you know, I understand the whole like the logical side versus the illogical side. You know, like, I sometimes will say it like my head, my heart, like my head gets it, but my heart isn't connected there.
Amen.
You know?
Yep.
and it's hard. Like, it's hard to get those connected sometimes.
Mhm.
And it's hard to trust sometimes. Especially when you've had that trust broken.
Yeah.
We've all had at some point in our life done something or trusted somebody that's completely broken our trust.
Yep.
And every time that happens, the next time it's harder and harder to give that trust away.
Amen. Yep.
Which then in the future, those masks that we do and we learn how to react to not being able to trust somebody starts to affect the way that we live in the future. As we, move on with our lives, we're really not moving on because we're still hanging on to those masks.
Absolutely.
And, and then that can affect our lives. And I think we've all experienced that too, like I have always said, and even my friends, like when I was in like high school and junior high, I always said, like, I don't want to live in the past. I want to live in the present. And I want to, I don't want to think 6 months down the road either. I don't want to think in the future. I want to think about right now and take care of my life right now. I don't want to
that's because as a teenager, your front brain wasn't done cooking.
Yeah, that's true too. That's true too.
That doesn't fit.
I will agree with
20s.
that. Yeah, true. But I mean, even so, like, I don't want to dwell on the past and the bad stuff that happened in the past. I want to move on from that. I want to learn from it, but I also want to move on so I can grow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I realized this week, how much of a fortress basically I built up because I didn't feel anybody else was going to protect me, Right. So I built up this fortress, if you will. And definitely, and then when you would see me, I would have on whatever mask I felt that you would be pleased with or would service me in the way that I needed it to socially, educationally, in whatever role that I was playing, because, I was still I never got out of that scared little child mode, and I just built all these walls up. And then, as I was saying, I lost the key. I'm like, where's the key? Even if I wanted to change it, I don't know how to change it now, and which I've been working with, my own counselor and trying to process all of this stuff. And it is definitely a process, but I'm definitely trying to make a new key, figure it out, and I don't know, go outside the castle walls a little bit and, have some adventure and stop being so driven by the fears and the past, if you will, and trying really hard to get in there behind these masks and move forward in a healthy way. Yeah. So.
Amen.
So it's my understanding that tea is up.
Oh, yeah, yes.
So one of the things I want to, there's a couple things I kind of want to cover. First of all is pretty much masks are not always bad. A lot of this conversation we've talked about how masks has served us and gotten us through tough things. And then we've also kind of alluded to the fact that sometimes the masks don't seem to be such a great idea. Especially in the case of this poem, you kind of get the sense that he's desperate for people to see behind the mask, to see what's really going on. But I think most of us have masks, whether we've been through something or not. It's sort of, we're social creatures. We're designed to adapt and even have different selves we present to others in order to be acceptable to our identified group. It helps us to stay safe in that group. We don't want to get kicked out of it. So that's just our instinct. In the research, this is often described as in different ways. I don't have any of those in front of me right now, but pretty much picture a circle and then several circles inside getting smaller and smaller. At the very center is the true self. Each of the circles outside of it are aspects of ourselves we let others see, with the most outer circle is what we show to the public, to the world in general. And that's true of all of us. We all do that. the ones who, as people get close to us, they get to inner circles, and we define how where we want those to be at. So, and that's sort of what this concept of the masks in my mind is. The other piece to it that we I think is important to note, and that we really got to so far on this podcast, is that if someone has experienced a trauma, the masks are more defined and set as a defense. They're useful at the time, and sometimes healthy and sometimes not. And often we hear them described as walls. Now, I had that little part written before we started this podcast, so I was kind of tickled that Lori brought that in, of how hers have defined her walls, of how she's kept people away. And that's not uncommon when we've experienced any sort of trauma, whether it be one, singular trauma or a complex trauma that comes out of like child abuse or domestic violence, or even soldiers who are in a battlefield, or people who live in a place where there's a lot of violence. So in order to survive, you develop these masks to get you through. And so that's not always a bad thing. They're a piece of our survival tools. So that was just a couple of things I wanted to say about masks in general.
I like that. I like what you said, and I like how you brought you didn't know I was going to say that, and I didn't know you were going to say that. So it's just kind of over time how I've learned that I protect myself, and so when I read this poem, I felt like somebody got me. And it was great because it was like I'm reading on this page, and I felt for the first time at that time in my life that I felt connected. I felt like somebody put into words what I was feeling. And that's why I feel it was so impactful for me. Because up to that point, I'm not sure anybody heard what I was saying or what I was not saying, and
What's really great about the poem for you, Lori, that I'm hearing is that you didn't have to let down your walls to get this poem. So this person heard you and knew what you were thinking without you having to let them in.
Amen. That's very good. Yes, very true. Very true. And most people want me or need me to let down these walls, and I'm like, what walls? There's no walls. They're in your imagination. I don't have any walls. I'm happy. I'm good. I'm fine. Keep going. Pass by. Yeah.
I don't know why, but suddenly the story of the emperor and his new clothes just came into my head.
Oh man, that's a good one. It's really interesting because I know you ladies have confessed that poetry is not your thing, but I've been connecting with this other person across the globe, in London, and he's got a brand new book that he's coming out with. Oh my gosh, and the name is escaping me now, but he has written he's compiled his poetry, and he was sharing. He's part of Aaron and mine's larger religious umbrella, and but living across the country, and
across the pond.
Yes, across the pond. And we all know how much I love England, so it was my favorite place. So I've been connecting with him in a way that I haven't connected with somebody in a long time. And he's sharing these little blurbs of his poetry. And I'm like, oh, that he pulled that right from my heart, or he pulled that right from my experiences, and And I've just been connecting with this poetry, and I'm like, oh man, I can't wait. I gotta go out and buy this guy's book, because I just want to, just the few little bits and pieces that I've seen, I'm like, okay, I need to hang this all over, um and I did
Right.
encourage him to listen to the podcast, so I hope he doesn't take that wrong, but I've really connected, and it was through the power of that written word. And you're right, it's a very safe place for me, T, that I don't have to let down a wall necessarily, or I can identify that somebody gets me and not feel unsafe. And that's very powerful for me. So, yeah.
Amen. Well, and I was thinking too, like, I love how we kind of, the masks can be a wall. And I know a lot of people talk about, breaking the bricks down brick by brick, or building it up brick by brick, and, as we open up, one more brick comes off the wall. In this case, we're talking like masks coming off. And
Yes.
And I think as an author and a reader, often, whether it's poetry or written fiction, if we can connect as authors or poets to a reader without ever having met them, that's when our craft makes a difference.
Oh,
because
yes.
I know for me, I've read books where a character's parent has died of cancer, or I've read a story where a character struggled with something that I struggle with. I can relate to those characters, and then I'm like, oh wow. Not that I didn't think I was alone, but it's like that moment, I'm like, oh wow, here's a fictional character. Like, this author wrote about somebody that's dealt with something like I have. And so it's freeing in a way for me. I'm like, wow.
Yep.
It's not as uncommon as we think. Because I think a lot of times people think, well, what I'm going through, nobody else understands.
Oh yeah, that's very common.
What's interesting about that is some of the most powerful moments in sessions with clients is when I get up to the board. I usually have a board I write on, and I list out all the symptoms of either depression, anxiety, or PTSD, most commonly PTSD. And I list them all out, and I turn around and I look and I see the look on their face, and it's this look of awe, like sometimes a teary awe, but usually there's almost a glimmer of hope. And I usually have the client check in at that moment. What are you feeling right now when you see this list of symptoms? And they're like, that's me. And I'm like, how do you think I knew those symptoms? And they're like, I don't know. How did you know that? I'm like, because others came before you with those symptoms.
Right.
Yes. Very
And
true.
so that's how we know about it, because you're not the only one.
Right. We definitely feel singled out sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talk about, we have our movies and our TV shows and our books that we like to use to get out of our own heads. That's kind of the same thing. That's we need to get out of our heads sometimes, because Satan is right around there looking around for where he can grab on.
I think I can use this one today.
Yep, I was like, oh, and as we're talking and we're bringing up stuff, I'm having flashbacks of the movie Inside Out.
Oh yes,
right.
What an amazing movie!
If nobody's watched it, I highly recommend it, because it deals with as a child goes from being born to life, and the little characters representing different, like, happy and sad, and
absolutely
those, and that's, it's a very bare bones version of like what we're talking about.
Therapists around the world use that with kids. Every time I look for resources to help kids understand feelings, that whole movie and characters and activities with those characters come up all the time.
Right. If I remember correctly, when I learned about the movie, I believe they had an entire panel of like theologians and counselors and all of this who worked together to build those characters and to really address things that children are going to feel and go through, and that whole process. And it definitely comes out in the film. You know, you definitely are able to, why do I get angry at that, or what's going through my head when this is going on, or where is that, so we all know who I am. I'm Joy, but
Yeah, we'll go with that one.
Yeah. But what's the blue characters?
Blue one is sadness.
Yes, sadness. Yes. And then there's anger and fear.
I forgot that.
Fear, right? Because he's afraid of.
Is that the purple one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I totally I get him sometimes.
So I just identified something, Tina. So I said that I'm Joy, right? That's the mask that I wear. But I'm really fear.
Ma'am.
But I'm really fear.
Yes, ma'am. So
breakthrough for
one
Lori.
of my favorite things about this movie that we're referring to is it addresses a pet peeve of mine. One of my pet peeves is that we live in a world that tells us that we're not supposed to feel anything negative. If you feel sad, you're doing it wrong. If you feel mad, you're doing it wrong. If you feel fear, you're doing it wrong. And if you can't figure it out, here's a pill. Now, I'm not against medication. Sometimes it's necessary. I totally get that. But I don't think it's an end-all, be-all, fix-all.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that we run into in the world today is that people can't tolerate these what we consider negative feelings, but they all have purpose. There's a purpose for those feelings. And if we pay attention to them and take care of ourselves, those feelings don't rule us. They work as alerts, alarms to let us know that something's up. And what I loved about the movie is it sort of addressed that.
Yes.
Especially in the end when sadness had to be there.
Right.
They couldn't let her go because she was an important piece of the whole.
It was so beautiful.
Right.
Yes, I love that.
So that's my 2 cents on that.
I like it. I like it. And look, I had a massive breakthrough right there. Didn't even realize it. That was awesome. It's the little things in life that get me, people. It just is.
That's it. I am going to find a way to incorporate that in some way to torture you.
I knew it. Why did I say anything? No, I'm just kidding.
I see some sort of gift coming your way to honor the epiphany.
I love it. I'm all about epiphanies. I love them. So
that was the name of an episode of Stargate Atlantis.
Of course it was.
Sorry.
Of course it was. I thought for sure we were going back to Sequest, but instead you went to Stargate Atlantis. I love it. I love it.
And the episode was written by Joe Flanagan, who plays Colonel John Shepard. Sorry, that was definitely a side note.
Right.
But
hashtag random. It's okay. What was it, Tina? T, that you said we were going to go down some rabbit holes?
Oh, yeah. My favorite thing in the world to do anyway.
Oh, it's so much fun. So that leads us kind of into this last little bit about where are we going? What are we doing with Behind the Mask? And so I'm opening up. I'm sharing some things about 6 months ago. I was chatting with my doctor, and I've been really, my body has basically been physically crumbling around me for the last few years. And I think that I had kind of, T, you and I have talked about the fact that I've kind of come to a place where I want to slip my wrist kind of way, but that I was accepting that my body was going to fail me much sooner than my heart or my will or anything else, you know, and that I felt the need in my life at the time was the only way to deal with that was to become at peace with dying. And not that that's not a good thing. It is a good thing. I mean, we're all going to die. Nobody gets out of this world alive, right? And there is a journey and a growth and some things that need to happen. Acceptance, you know, in that we are all going to die. But I have always said that I'm about quality of life, not quantity of life. But I thought that that really was in reference to being okay with dying pretty young, because I just turned, 50 this last year. And, oh, wow, half a century. But that's young. Most people don't think they're going to die before 50 or even in their 50s, right? Unless it's an accident or, some tragedy. But I was really trying to make myself okay with that. But I've come to realize, for me personally, that that's maybe not what living quality life is. That I had this professor, Professor Bob. We did, it was Virgil in the Latin Golden Age. And every day we wrote out kind of journal-like responses to the classics, to Greek literature. And I know you guys your eyes are glazing over, but I very much enjoyed it. And I had just found out that I had chronic liver disease, and that the doctors were telling me, well, we think you've got about 2 to 5 years. I was 37 years old. I'm like, what? This is go back to the drawing board. It can't be me, And I was blown out of the water. And I get back to campus and I happen to have his class next. And I literally couldn't write. I wasn't processing. I was really kind of frozen. And he came up to me after class, because I'm normally very talkative and I'm always sharing and I want to be involved. And I was like almost silent through the whole class. So he obviously knew something was wrong, and you didn't have to be very intuitive to figure that out.
No, that's not wrong.
Yeah. And he's like, Lori, is there something on your mind? Like, what's going on? And I could tell, like you said, Tina, that this wasn't the person across the counter in the grocery store. He really genuinely wanted to know. And I had an open afternoon and we went and shared a cup of coffee, and I just spilled this stuff out. Like, I think I have to face death, And he's like, well, we kind of all have to face that, Lori. And I was like, well, yeah, okay. But I mean, I'm like really facing it. And he's like, I had just come to this conclusion that, okay, well, then I'm going to embrace it. And I'm going to dive in head first. And he's like, he really challenged me. And I did not fully accept his challenge at first, because he was like, so Lori, what you're telling me is you think that God is asking you to go quietly into that still night? And I was like, well, yeah, isn't that what he's asking me? And he goes, no, that's not what you, he goes, I don't believe that's what God is asking you to do. He goes, you have so many talents and you have so many gifts, and you're this bright star, and you should be living life to the fullest right up until the very, very, very end. And you definitely I don't think you want to go into that still night quietly. You want to go into it raging. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, it sounded really great. And I was like temporarily motivated, but it took some time. And I really went through some dark times where I wasn't grasping that. And so back to the doctor's appointment, the doctor says to me, okay, Lori, so we know you can't get on the liver transplant list and you can't have your knee replacements that you need, and you can't do this because of your weight. I am very overweight, and my weight has become my security blanket. It is a mask, and I have been wearing it, and it has been my protector, and it has kept people away in a way that I needed them to be away, because I just couldn't let people really in. This is like really much harder than I thought it would be. Thanks. I'm kind of shaking. But I realized when she said, so her idea was, we're kind of running out of time, Lori. Your liver's starting to get worse. Your labs are coming back consistently. I've started to have some what's called hepatic encephalopathy, which is robbing my brain and function. And I've had a lot of physical things. I had the mini stroke a couple years back. My body was truly not my own. You know you're facing death when the whole room is like quiet, and you can't talk, and over across the room, doctors and nurses are talking to your sons, and they're like, okay, so does she have a will? Does she have this? Who is her medical power? Like, it was like this quiet, really hard conversation. And when my boys came back to my bedside, you guys, I'm going to cry, but I could see the absolute, like, oh my gosh, we've talked about mom dying, but I think it's really here. Like, mom is dying. And there was just fear in their eyes. And I'm laying there and I can't move. I can't move my limbs. I can't talk. And all I wanted to do was hold them and just tell them how much I love them, and that we were going to get through this like we'd gone through everything else. And, that I was sorry they were having to deal with all of this. And so then fast forward 2 years, and I've gotten to this place where the doctor says, well, so would you consider bariatric bypass surgery? And I'm not going to lie. I was like, I had thought about it about 4 years prior, kind of after, Professor Bub got me to like say, go raging into that still night. And I wasn't ready. And the psychologist turned me down. She was like, you're not ready. The doctors, none of my labs came back good. My A1C was out of control because I'm diabetic, and everything pointed to, yeah, you don't get to have this. This is not something you can do. And so, but when she brought it up this time, there was hope. And I was like, maybe this is for me this time. I don't know. And so I prayed about it. I sought out conversations with my friends and my loved ones. And I was like, okay, maybe God needed to bring me still. And I needed to kind of face some of those fears and start to be like, okay, but now those walls, those masks that I'm wearing, they're going to kill me. They're going to suffocate me, if you will, if I don't get this off. So I was like, okay, so if I go to these things, God, you're apparently going to have to open up these doors, because they didn't open up for me the first time. And so if you want me to have this, the labs are going to have to come back good. Psyche's going to have to say that I'm okay and that I'm ready for this. And the doctors are all going to need to be on board. And over the last 6 months, that's exactly what's happened. And so in about 6 weeks, I'm going to be having bariatric surgery. and, losing weight and breaking down these walls. And I'm like, okay, I don't think I can do this by myself. And maybe I wasn't meant to do it by myself. Maybe I'm not. And I've always kind of hidden this stuff behind the masks. And people that know me are like, who is this person talking? Because I'm sharing very intimate things about myself. And I had this really intimate conversation today with a friend of mine. We just had this girl day and we talked very intimately about things. And I kept thinking, wow, that was actually good. Like, I think I liked it. And so I'm trying to embrace this, and I'm trying to embrace being vulnerable and transparent, but not in a way that I'm not being safe or responsible or, sticking myself out into a dangerous place, but I'm trying to do it in a healthy way. And so, of course, I went to two of my closest friends, T and EJ, and I said, would you guys like to do this journey with me? I'd like to do a podcast. I'd like to get behind the mask, if you will, and see what's there and stop being so afraid of it. And here we are on this journey. And I'm hoping I haven't scared people away with all my personal stuff, but I hear that this is good stuff and that this is what we're supposed to do. So here I am boldly walking forward, and I am so happy that I have, T and EJ here with me to do that. And I have an amazing tribe around me. I really do. I have my sons are all for this. My friends are for this. Everybody in my life is like, Lori, if this is what you and the doctors think is best for you, we're going to help you do it. And so I feel like that's what's happening. And I have now very publicly announced that I'm having bariatric surgery. And
You guys got to understand that just a few months ago, she
no,
would have
I
never
would
done
not
that.
have. Why would I do that? That's insane. Something that my counselor, that I'm currently working with, part of my bariatric team, he said to me, he said, Lori, when you say you're going to try to do something, he goes, you really mean that you're not, or that you've already determined that you don't think this is going to work. And I was like, ouch. And he's like, listen, I'm not trying to be too hard on you, but he goes, I think you need to change try to I'm going to do. And so my kids and I kind of got a little nerd on. So I was like, oh, like Yoda. Okay. I'm going to embrace my inner Yoda. I am not going to try to do something. I'm going to do something. And that's what I feel like this podcast is going to help me to do. And I hope by doing it in this very vulnerable, transparent way, that I will hopefully, all of us will be helping others in that journey. And because we all have journeys and we all have fears, and you said, Tina, to all wear masks. And they're not all bad. So this is me discovering and doing, and you guys with me, and here we are. Are we ready? So if you think you want to be involved in that, that's kind of where the podcast is headed. And we're going to be getting behind the mask and uncovering feelings and fears and happy things and laughter and all kinds of amazing things we're going to do together.
So one of the things that I was going to say to what Lori was just talking about, her counselor making the observation about trying being her code word for, well, I've already made up my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm either not going to or can't do it. And
Yep.
I was thinking about, I'm wondering if he had the same professor that I did, because her thing was, you do not try to do something. You cannot try to do something. You either do or you don't. And we tried to argue with her, so she threw a pencil on the ground and she said, try to pick that up. You're either
Okay.
going to pick it up or you're not.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to throw the pencil at her.
Yeah, I would have wanted to too. Oh man, that's amazing though.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, over here, like, because in our, the singles ministry I'm a part of, one of the leaders shared a phrase, and I don't know if it is something he came up with or it was something he heard, but he said, we're not going to try, we're going to train.
Ooh, yeah.
Good.
Because we can try to be better people, but it's, what's trying? Well, or we could train. And, as an athlete, somebody as an athlete trains. They work out, they exercise, they work on their craft, and they train to be better. And
right.
That's what we need to do. And so I think in this, like, Lori, I'm so proud of you. Like, even 2 or 3
I'm
years
still
ago,
shaking.
2 or 3 years ago, you were like, nope, I'm not going to deal with this. We're not going to talk about this. I'm, and now, like, even 6 months ago, when you first started, like, the process, because, to go through gastric bypass or any kind of bariatric surgery, it's a process. Like, you have to do multiple tests, CT scans, EKGs.
Yeah.
I mean, every test under the sun, blood work.
That stress test was horrible.
Yeah. And, you have to do a counseling portion of it. You can't, they want to make sure you're mentally prepared to not only go through the surgery, but also to manage the changes that your body's going to go through before and after the surgery. And
adjusting to that identity.
Mm-hmm.
Say that again.
Adjusting to the identity.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially because, as Lori's explained, her weight has been a mask for her for so long that, that's, we were saying earlier, it's part of her. We know Lori, that's what she looks like, and we love her. And it's a change. And internally, like, no matter how much we say we're going to be okay with it, it's a big change. And I know me personally, like, change is tough on me. But that's why I'm glad, like, there's medical professionals that have studied out, like, how this process works well. And she's been cleared and she's going to have the surgery. And, I'm proud of her for pursuing it. And I know I was honestly against it up until 6 months ago. Not for Lori, just myself, like, because it's been suggested to me in the past. And I said, yeah, I don't believe in that. Nope, not going to happen.
Right.
But I've seen the unsuccessful stories. I've had some people in my life that didn't do well and tell me that it's the worst mistake they ever made, which kind of, I'm like, yeah, it's not making me want to even consider it.
Right.
But recently, as Lori has, gone through this process, and I've been a little more open to it. Recently, my doctor has also asked me to consider it. Whether I will or not, I don't know. That's what God's got plans for. I don't know what He's got planned for. And it's definitely a mask. It's some days I just want, I'm like, why am I bothering with this? Because I want to be me. But I also want to be a healthy me. And I want to be around for a while.
Right.
And if that means losing a little weight and getting a little help to do it, well, there's multiple ways I can lose weight, yes, but we'll see, it's whatever God has planned. That's going to be the best for me. Yeah. What was I going to say? Yeah. So I think we're going to have some fun. Like Lori said, I don't know. I feel like we're going to have a lot more of these inside out episodes. Somehow that's going to, come up again. But I enjoy talking about this, and I hope maybe it'll help. We do want to remind you guys that, everything we say on here is not meant to be, your diagnosis. And, it's not to replace a conversation with your doctor or your counselor, or your psychologist, psychiatrist. These are just experiences that we've had to tell you that you're not alone struggling with maybe something that you've heard about on this podcast.
Yes.
And
and we want to continue to encourage you to share with us your thoughts, ideas. If you have an idea that you'd like us to talk about, an issue, or anything that you want us to discuss on the podcast, EJ, you're so much better at telling them where to do this, but on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Behind the Mask PC. Did I get that right?
Yep.
All right. Yes. So please go on there, share, and let us know what you're enjoying. Let us know what you want to hear in the future, and we will do our very best to address those things.
And you can also, if you're not into social media, you can email us too at BehindTheMaskPC@gmail.com. I know a lot of people aren't on social media, and that's okay. Yeah. And, we're going to continue to have episodes every other Sunday come out. And, feel free to message us your responses. You can review on the platform that you listen to us on, or you can just send us a message on social media or the email. We'd love to hear from you.
And EJ, you're gonna let everybody know we're on like all these different platforms now, right?
Oh yeah,
I'm excited about that.
Yeah, we used the Anchor platform, and they did all the footwork. So all we had to do is post the first episode, and it went live, and they gave it to all the other podcast platforms. So we're on quite a few of them now.
Yay!
Which definitely broadens our audience.
How exciting. This is fun and scary, but it's fun.
And scary, yeah. But I think it'll be healthy for all of us, because I know for me, like, there's been days when I have a bad day, and like I go talk to Lori or I talk to a friend and I just kind of tell them about my day, even if it's just a vent. I feel so much better afterwards. And this is a way that we can maybe vent our frustrations, or admit, because maybe in our immediate social group, whether it's friends from church or mutual friends from a fandom we're in, or just family members, not everybody's gonna, empathize or sympathize, but they want to be there for us. And, it's nice to talk to people that maybe get it a little more.
I like it.
So, we just want to thank you for listening. This episode is now available on Anchor, Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at BehindTheMaskPC. And we're working on getting everything on YouTube as well. You can find EJ at Instagram and Twitter as EJ8302. And T has a YouTube channel called T's Life Lessons you can contact her with. If you enjoyed what you've heard so far, we'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to review us on Anchor or the platform you listen to us on, or you can message us through our social media. If you'd like to help keep these episodes coming, you can visit anchor.fm/BehindTheMaskPC/support to monetarily support the podcast. And if there's any ideas you do want to share or have us talk about in the future, you can send us an email at BehindTheMaskPC@gmail.com, or message us with our social medias, and we'll hopefully try and get an episode to talk about that. So on behalf of Lori, T, and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.